Let's now look at how we can use Python as a client to an SQL server and look at connectivity between Python and this. It turns out to be actually fairly simple, and once we've done Python, it's a very straightforward process. So the essential goal here is, and irrespective of which particular server you're using, whether it's Postgres or MySQL or some other server, we have the same basic structure. So there's a set of standards that have been set down for a Python database API, and we follow that standard. If you move to a different server, you're going to have to again look for the equivalent API commands that will sort of connect you to that server itself. So what do we do? Well, the steps are: we import the API module, whatever that is. And remember, in Python, whenever you want to do something, you import a library. So that's what we want to do here. Then you acquire a connection with the database server. It's much like we clicked on the localhost thing in our MySQL workbench. What that did was it created a connection between the workbench, which is the client, and your MySQL server, which is the server, right? So similarly, we also need to do that in Python. We acquire a connection with the database server. So there's going to be a function that will acquire the connection. Then we issue a bunch of commands, which are SQL commands, essentially sent as strings to the server, or you call a stored procedure. A stored procedure like our source, or like our school schema.sql or school data.sql. Those are stored procedures, sets of queries that are stored in a single file. And once we've done all that, we can close the connection. That's our basic structure here. The library that we work with is called py-mysql, and we want to work with this. So the structure here is we do the same steps that we outlined before. We start by importing the library, which is import py-mysql. We acquire a connection with the database server, and there's a py-mysql function called connect, which you give it the name of the connection itself and the server itself, which could be a URL, but in our case it's just localhost, the name of the user, and I'm going to use root, the password, and actually we need one other thing here, which I seem to have forgotten to put in, the database itself. All right, we'll see that in the example. So connect is the way of connecting to the database, and then you create what's called a cursor object. What is the cursor object? The cursor object is essentially this. It tells you, hey, this is where my command is going to be. So you can see the little blinking line here, that's a cursor. So the cursor object tells it that this is the next command, and you enter commands into your database and enter all that kind of stuff. So the key here is connect, and then you create a cursor object, and once you're finished with that particular cursor or that thing, you can close it using the close command. So let's look at this in practice and go to our Safari here, and we have Python and MySQL. So the first thing I want to do is import py-mysql. Now you may not have it installed. I'm not sure if I have it on this machine. No, it's not there, right? So again, just to revisit this in a second, what we can do is we go here and do pip install py-mysql. So this is going to go and get the py-mysql library and install it. And once we've done it, we can import it in, right? So remember, this command, the exclamation point, is our command that tells our Jupyter browser to not use Python, but to go out to the operating system and run this command, run the pip command, which is the Python installer program, from the operating system. So it's saying get this from, and you have to have a web connection for that, internet connection for that, because this is going out to the internet to get it, and it gets py-mysql, downloads it, and installs it. So that's our step one. So we've got that. So now we import this in, and then we create a cursor object. So I'm going to create a connection. Sorry. So I call the connect function from py-mysql, and I give it the various attributes that I need. The attributes I need are the URL of the server, in this case it's localhost, so we just use that. The name of the user, and note that these are all strings, right? These are Python strings. The user I'm using is root, and you're probably using the root too. I've set up my password as NONE because it's just what I've set up. And it doesn't mean there's no password. It's just a string that has the uppercase N followed by ONE. and I'm telling it to use the database SchoolDB. So you have to tell the Python PyMySQL connector what database you're going to be using when you call this thing here. And then once I've got that, so I now have a variable called db that contains my connection. And now for that connection, I say set up a cursor object. Why do I need that? Well, you could actually be connecting to multiple databases. You don't necessarily, or multiple servers. Your Python program might be getting data from one server, like perhaps you're a trading application and you're getting data from your historical price databases. You're getting data from maybe a fundamentals database somewhere else. You're getting data that's coming in from your trades, and doing all kinds of stuff for portfolio management, mark to market, all kinds of things. So there could be multiple sources for data. So you could be having DB1, DB2, DB3, DB4, whatever, right? So multiple connections. So for each connection, you create a connection object, and in this case that's like DB, and then in the variable DB, and then for each connection itself, you can create a cursor object. You can create multiple cursor objects because you could have multiple clients inside your program itself, right? So that's a possibility too. So we run this stuff here and we get these two objects. We can take a look at them. So if I just go insert cell above here and I say DB, it tells me it's a PyMySQL connection object, and if I do cursor, it tells me it's a cursor object, right? So now the next thing you want to do is execute queries. So what the way this works is that when you execute a query, you call this function called execute on a cursor. Okay, so you take any cursor and call the function execute on it, and that's what gets executed. All right. And what you do is you pass your query as a string to the function. So this is pure SQL. There's no nothing fancy in that, right? So it says show tables. That's my string. Notice I have my semicolon because every query ends with semicolon, and that's inside a Python string. So what this is going to do is it's going to go to the server and execute this command, and every SQL query returns a table. So it'll get a table back. A table is what? A table is a bunch of rows, right? So you have row 0, row 1, row 2, row 3. So you can think of it as a collection. And what we end up doing is you get this collection back, and you can start that sort of sits. So let's say we have a server here, and this is your client program. You can think of a buffer over here. So when you send the query goes to the server, and the server puts the result in a buffer. Okay, so this is our table, and then the client can say, get me one item from the buffer. So it'll take one item and remove it from the buffer and give it to the client, or it can say, get me all of them. So the way it does that is it uses these commands: fetch one to get one item, or fetch all to get them all. So let's take a look at this here.